In this, our 150th episode, we share some lessons that I've learned from the first 149. Let's get started.
Let's get some money. From New Money, New Problems, it's the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. Negotiating compensation, purchasing your first investment property, helping your family with money, the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. New money brings new problems that require new solutions. Join us as we work through them together. I'm Brenton Harrison, and this is the New Money, New Problems podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 150th episode of the New Money, New Problems podcast. It is really exciting to be recording this episode. And the funny thing about it is I was not even aware that this was going to be the 150th episode until I uploaded last week's episode and saw that it was number 149. But the surprise was almost better because it gave me the opportunity to look back and just really relish and bask in the fact that we've done a tremendous amount of work over the last few years, hopefully provided some value to you along the way. And what I wanted to do in this episode was share in the first half of the episode some things that I have picked up from the listeners and that we've picked up as a firm and our clients over the course of the last 3 years of releasing this podcast. And then the second half of the episode, I'm going to share some things that are more personal to me, personal to our firm in terms of what we've gleaned about the podcast itself, the journey, and what is to come next. And I want to start with identifying something that I already knew when I started this podcast, but you see even more clearly when people have the ability to reach out and tell you what they appreciate about the show. And that is how much stress people are under when it comes to their finances. And the unique thing about that is, I think everybody who is stressed about finances knows that they're stressed about finances, but it's a very lonely feeling. And the thing that makes it more lonely as you progress in your income is the thought that, again, as we've covered, you feel you shouldn't have this much money stress and that the people who are earning similar amounts next to you are not as stressed. Well, I can tell you from working with clients and with people who give us feedback from these episodes that the ones that we get the most consistent feedback on are the ones where I'm not only transparent about things that I've gone through financially in the past, but also where I give them the ability to understand that it is okay and it is natural to be stressed about money. As a matter of fact, I'll push it a little further and I'll say that even with clients with whom we work who earn $600, $700, $800, $900,000 a year, they are still worrying about money if they are not someone who is in their second or third or fourth generation of wealth. There's something about being the first in your family to do something at a high level that does not make you feel any better. As a matter of fact, it can add extra pressure. And I have found that there is no income that you can get to that exempts you from that pressure. Along those lines, the second point that I have actually speaks to how you communicate that stress. How you talk about and express the stress that you have around money is a skill that's worth developing. And if you don't develop it, you're in danger. Some of this is personal experience. I can tell you that my wife and I have been married since 2012. Our anniversary is right around the corner. Not the easiest thing in the world to be married that period of time. If you have been married that period of time, you know it comes with its highs and lows. But one of the consistent lows over the course of our relationship has been how we communicated our feelings about money to each other. We just could not get in a rhythm in terms of, do we keep our finances separate? Do we keep them together? Well, whose name is going to be on this card? Well, should you be able to spend on that card if we're keeping things separate? Or like, why didn't you tell me about that purchase? The statement was about to close and how much do we put in this retirement account? Well, I don't know. If you're putting this much, then why should I have to put all of those things, whatever they would be? A lack of skill in communicating how we were feeling to each other put us in a position where it was just very hard to come to terms with how we were going to move forward as a family. Now, I can tell you I've come across couples who do a great job of communicating and having the same goals, but I can also say that it does not imply an unhealthy marriage if you have different ways of going about managing money, or if you have different goals or different stressors. But the key is figuring out, how do we find a healthy way to express what we're feeling to each other? Because the alternative is not having a conversation that leads to financial harm. And I have not only seen at the audience level that cause harm, but on the client level, not only have we seen a number of relationships just not make it, and when you go through the reasons why, finances were one of the biggest of those reasons, but we see an even bigger number of couples where in the meeting room, I can tell that they've been arguing about finances. It is apparent, it's in the air. And even if the couple is married forever, the inability to get in the same rhythm financially causes long-term harm. But that's not just with a partner or a spouse. It extends to people outside of your household. When we did the episode where we talked about how to talk to your parents about money, and then another episode where we talked about why the holiday season isn't a great time to talk about money. And we'll link to all these in the show notes. I can't tell you the number of people who told us stories of how a Thanksgiving dinner or a Christmas or a Hanukkah was just blown up because of a negative conversation that they had with a family member, a parent, or sibling when they tried to work through things that have to be worked out. But the way that they went about doing it wasn't appropriate. It didn't speak to the needs of the person who's receiving the information. And instead of just bumping heads, there needs to be a pivot or an alternate route or a conversation that clears the air. And that's why I say, when it comes to the soft skills of finances, figuring out how to talk about finances with other is a skill worth developing. Next up, and this has to do with financial advice. One of the things that I love most about being a financial advisor, when you have the ability to have your licenses revoked, to have your certifications removed, it gives you a higher bar of responsibility when you give advice, which is why when you talk to people who have licenses, who are in a position where they are regulated, it's unlikely that you'll find a person who will just tell you everybody needs to do X, Y, Z. In fact, I would bet that if you round up 10 people online who are telling you definitively that this is the way that you should do something financially, you might look at those 10 people and find that 8 or 9 or 10 of them are not licensed or regulated. So there's not as much at risk if they give you information that ends up harming you. Well, the reason that I like that element of what we do is because my opinion is when it comes to financial advice, it is far more valuable to understand your options than it is to understand rules of thumb. And that is the way that most publicly available financial advice is written. Clickbait headlines about exactly how much you should put towards food, exactly what percentage of your income you should put towards rent or your mortgage, whether you're behind in retirement savings, and what the numbers say you should have saved by a particular age. It doesn't mean anything. What's more valuable is understanding your options if you are on track, ahead of pace, or behind. So I don't care how much you spend on a mortgage. I care far more about teaching you how many ways you can structure a mortgage, which is why we did an episode on whether you should actually put 20% down on a property. I don't care how much you put towards your 401k. I care far more about knowing how to increase the amount you put towards your 401k. I care about telling you how to respond when you're behind in retirement planning. These are the episodes that I feel add the most value, and I hope that if you've listened to this podcast consistently, you feel a little better about ignoring the rules of thumbs that you can't follow that you see online. And that actually leads to the fourth point that I want to make, and it has to do with how these articles are written. I have been extremely fortunate, partially because of these podcasts, to be in a position where truly, if not weekly, definitively every other week, we're reached out to by some publication who wants us to submit a quote or be interviewed for an article. So I've been through the process 25 to 50 or more times a year of being able to sit with the reporter, give my opinion as a quote unquote financial expert, and see behind the curtain of how these article ideas are generated. And you'd be interested to know that for most publications, there are not many staff writers who are writing these articles. They have a few, but you often find that these are freelance people with an interest in finance who are writing for multiple publications at a time. And they often get paid per article, which means that they are incentivized to bring quality article ideas to that newsroom and to that editorial staff. Even if you have a staff writer, they're going to have meetings where they go through things based on trends in the industry that they know are going to generate clicks. And then they reach out to financial experts that are in their Rolodex and they ask them to submit quotes or to sit down for an interview. And the reason I say that is because these people do excellent work, But the goal of a financial publication is to get an audience to what they are producing. And it is just simply not as valuable to do a ton of articles about the importance of an emergency reserve. It's more valuable to put out an article about how much money you should have saved by 30, 40, and 50, and what to do if you don't have those funds saved. Now, to be clear, I contribute to those articles. I have been quoted in those publications for that type of content, but it's important to know that even if you're reading an article, that inside of that article has great points from a great writer and great contributors that gives you advice that's helpful to your finances. It goes through a similar process to what you see on social media, where they're going to be trying to have a headline or an opening statement that speaks to you, even if the depth of that content reveals a little more context. And at some point, you have to have a mechanism to clear out the fluff of a headline from what you can actually put in place to benefit your money. And lastly, before the break, what I have found is, in spite of the natural inclination to do content like that, which we try to avoid unless it truly is something that we can comment on that is a relevant news story where we can provide some more context, there is still value in foundational topics. If you go back to some of the episodes that get the most consistent re-listens, it is very different from the episodes that get the biggest bump in the first 7 days. So for example, we did an episode about like, can you pay off your mortgage in 7 years or 10 years? And it was talking about velocity banking. We saw the numbers for that episode fly through the roof, but it doesn't get a lot of re-listens. When I go back and I see the ones that people are tuning into a year or two after, those type of episodes don't get a ton of re-listens. But you know what does? Episodes like, how much should I have in my emergency fund? Episodes like, how does a home equity line of credit work? So even if you're attracted to a flashy topic, even if you do want to know about how someone can join on cryptocurrency, which we don't talk about on this podcast, if you want to know about this stock pick that's going to go up 700% in the next 6 months, subconsciously we know that it's unlikely that those things pan out. And we know that the foundational elements are the things that we really need to understand if we're going to level up financially. So I hope that those insights from what the audience has taught us for the first 150 episodes have been helpful. After the break, I'm going to tell you what I've learned from myself and our team along this journey.
This is the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen. We'll be right back.
Are you wondering what new money problems you might be overlooking in your financial life? If so, we've got great news. We've crafted the New Money, New Problems Gap Finder to identify potential weaknesses in your finances in areas ranging from budgeting, investments, insurance, and even the threat your extended family's finances could pose to your household. Please head to newmoneynewproblems.com/gapfinder to complete it today. Again, that's newmoneynewproblems.com/gapfinder to take the assessment.
You're listening to the New Money, New Problems podcast. Subscribe now at newmoneynewproblems.com. Welcome back.
It's now time for me to share my personal lessons from the podcast. The first is that I'm very glad that we have not let perfection be the enemy of progress. When we started this, we were working with a good friend now who at the time was a consultant, Thomas K.R. Stovall. And we started this podcast after completing his Podcast in 10 program. But at the time, all the fancy stuff that you need to have like a top 1% podcast, we didn't have. And I wasn't in a position to spend $10,000 on podcast equipment to make it happen. We're going to talk about that equipment in just a second. But to me, that has been a valuable lesson for other areas of my life where it's like, just get it started, just hit record, just press play, just make that phone call, because you can make things perfect along the way. But if you're trying to start perfect, you may never start at all. And the next thing has to do with how rough some of those episodes were and sometimes are. And that has to do with consistency. When we started this, and I've told you, whenever I'm doing something that's a big undertaking, I always commit to a minimum amount of work that I'm going to do before I evaluate whether or not to continue. So before we started this, I committed to doing 100 episodes, which is basically 2 years. Not only before I looked back and said, how did this go? But before we even re-released an episode, I said, we're going to go 100 episodes straight. And then after that time, I'll look back and see whether it's worth it and whether I should keep doing it. And there have been times where I've had to record podcast episodes in a hotel lobby. There have been times when I've had to, at 1 a.m, be sitting there editing a podcast episode. So there's a ton of episodes in our catalog that if I look back at it, I'm like, oof, I really wish we hadn't released that at all. But I can tell you that people pay attention to things you do consistently, even if you're doing them poorly. The number of people who reach out to us on LinkedIn or make passing comments about the podcast, it has shocked me. And some of the episodes that they bring up are some of the episodes that I would have rather we not posted. But by posting every Friday, by posting on social media, people pay attention even when they think they're not paying attention. And if you think about it, if somebody showed up on LinkedIn or on social media or in your Instagram feed every day and posted the worst video in the world with the worst audio, but they did it literally every single day, you're going to at least notice that they're making a consistent effort. And there's something about that that makes people subconsciously or consciously pay attention to what you're doing. And that is something that has provided us tremendous benefits over time that I didn't expect. So hammering home the value of getting started, it's not just getting started. It's the fact that we got started and we committed to something and we continued and followed through on that commitment with consistency. And they've rewarded us for that consistency more so than they have paid attention to the specific details of each piece of content that we produce. And that brings me to the last thing, which is self-awareness. I do feel like we've improved over time. I also feel like there's much left to be done. As a matter of fact, earlier this summer, I was having a conversation with Danielle and Sina on our team, and I was saying, I feel like the podcast is growing, but it's not growing at the rate that I would like. And even if it were growing at the rate I would like, we can still do better because I know that there's something there. So we went on a constructive criticism feedback journey. We worked with my friend Virginia Elder to do an audit of our podcast and some things in our processes that were stunting our growth. We had people evaluate our email list. We had people evaluate the process of turning someone from a follower into someone who's actually on our email list and attends our webinars. We have gone through media trainings in recent months to get feedback and criticism in some cases. Not all of it seems like constructive criticism, but I can tell you there's always something constructive to find in the criticism that you receive. And to me, there were some things that I wasn't aware of that would make our podcast better. And then there was consistent feedback to let me know, okay, it's time to take this even more seriously than you had before. The most consistent feedback we received was on the quality of the camera and the lighting that we use. Those are things that I have been resisting putting money towards because who wants to spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a camera? But when you get feedback that says, hey, your content isn't shareable because of the quality of the video, that says, hey, if you did your intro this way, it would be better. You have to have the self-awareness, even when you're doing something hard, even when you feel you're doing something well and it's kind of become your baby, that there are improvements to be made. And sometimes it requires an even greater commitment than you've been willing to make up to this point. So I'm committed to that. We're committed to that. We are in the process even this week. My wife and I are going to check out some stuff to redesign the setup of how we record this podcast. We are going to make investments into cameras and paints and the design of the studio. We are going to make sure that we produce content that is more shareable online because I want this to be the biggest next big thing because of the value that it provides, not for glory metrics, but because of the impact we can have on our listeners. I hope that if you followed us along this journey that we've had some impact on you. I hope you'll share this podcast with others, and I hope you'll continue with us for another 150 episodes, starting with me seeing you next week.
From New Money, New Problems, this was the New Money, New Problems podcast, a show for successful professionals searching for the tools they need to navigate financial opportunities and obstacles they've never seen.